Blessings in Jesus, dear friends. My name is James Jacob Prash from Moriel Ministries. Welcome to Catching Up with Jacob, here with our normal crew and cast of characters. I, however, will only be giving input through this insert. The reason being I am in transit traveling to the United States. This week in Britain, we had a situation where a Christian physician, wonderful man, who had been a medical missionary to the poor in Tanzania, but then returned to Britain from the mission field, has for the second time gotten in trouble and been investigated by the medical authorities. The charge against him for the second time was praying with a patient. Praying with the patient. Now, you can have physicians counseling underage patients about transitioning sexually, so-called. You can have them doing all kinds of things, but prayer is a violation of the professional code of ethics of physicians. Apparently, the person who we prayed with had some history of mental problems and began complaining. I don't know all of the specifics, but this is the second time it's happened to him. Now, I suppose a Christian physician in Britain could recommend that a patient talk to a hospital chaplain. But most hospital chaplains are not saved Christians. They have a job. They don't have a calling to the ministry. They have the form of religion, but deny the power therein. They're not born again, most of them. And the relatively few who are, of course, restricted in what they can and cannot say in publicly funded hospitals, particularly. This is what we're dealing with. It's getting more and more like that, not just in medicine, but as we know, in all the professions. In teaching, law, emergency services, it's getting more and more difficult to be a Christian in that sphere. I think just as we have a movement towards Christian schools, that we need a movement towards Christian private clinics. There'll be no pressure to do abortions. I know Christian physicians in Britain who found themselves in trouble because of their refusal to scrub for non-therapeutic abortions. I've known all kinds of things like that. During COVID, there were Christian nurses who found themselves out of a job, and quite a number of them. Now, I'm not trying to associate the vax with Christianity. I'm simply saying these were Christian nurses who gave the vax prayerful consideration and believed the Lord led them not to get vaccinated. And they were fired and had to fight legally and fight with the unions and through the unions and the courts to get their jobs back. It's getting more and more like this in medicine and in teaching and in the police and in any profession you choose virtually. And it's not only in Britain. It is a sad case. But what I am looking at is this. We are going to need more Christian law firms, more Christian medical practices, more Christian schools, more Christian independent web servers outside of the mainstream social media and YouTube. We have to form a community of our own. Easier said than done. But things cannot continue going the way they're going. And again, I'm speaking only of Britain. These things are happening in America and to a considerable degree, Australia, New Zealand, and certainly, perhaps above all, Canada. Not good, not easy, but that's the reality. We really need to be thinking of this and praying about this. Not just schools. We've been advocating independent Christian schools for some time, but Christian medical and legal and other professional practices. I do think this is going to become an issue where it is going to become increasingly difficult for Christians to find employment or sustain employment in secular environments. Of course, they'll eventually try to come after Christian practices as well and Christian schools as well. Nothing we can do about that other than pray for the moment, but we need to react to the situation that presently exists. It is not going to get any better except maybe for interim periods. It is ugly, it is unfair, but it is reality. It's the reality in Britain, it's the reality in Australia, it's the reality in America, and it's the reality certainly in Canada and elsewhere. What can we do? Well, we know the Lord is coming, and he said it was going to be like this, but it is like this. This week, I saw something that in better times would have shocked me. I'd say shocked. But it doesn't shock me now because the times have not been better. I was utterly disgusted some time ago when Bill Hybels of the Willow Creek Church, and he was somebody very much in the school that was begun by Robert Schuller, perpetuated by Rick Warren, etc., the market-driven church. I met Bill Hybels very briefly once at, I think, Heathrow Airport or in Chicago, at Chicago Airport. I met him very briefly once. But O'Hare Airport. But this is before he was found to be an immorality and kicked out of the ministry to be replaced by a woman who then got in trouble herself as the senior pastor at Willow Creek. That place was all the rage. It was all the talk. It was the biggest show in town. People were going there. It was a mecca, just like Saddle Creek was, just like at other points, Toronto or Pensacola were. That's the place people wanted to go because that's where God was doing things, like Bethel claims to be now and so forth. Well, we know that freak show is over, so the people have moved on to find another freak show. But during that heyday of Willow Creek with their former pastor, an immoral man, he had a Muslim imam after September 11th, invited a Muslim imam to come to the church and explain Islam. I asked at the time, can you find me a mosque that will allow an evangelist to explain the gospel to Muslims? It's a one-way street. Therefore, I'm not shocked by what has happened this past week. Beth Moore, who I consider to be a mystic, an absolute mystic. I've got a video clip of her and John Piper leading the Lectio Divina with the visualization and the rest of it. She's in this New Age pretending to be Christian theologically. She joined the High Anglican Church. Now, High Anglicanism is interesting. It is similar, very similar to catechetical Lutheranism. It is, as I've explained it before, ecclesiastically Protestant, but doctrinally and theologically sacramentalist, like Roman Catholicism. In other words, they're Catholics who are not under the Pope. They're the Catholics, Anglo-Catholics, who claim the British monarch is the head of the church, the titular head of the church on earth, instead of the Pope, but otherwise they're sacramentalists. They have the same kinds of doctrines as Rome. So you might say doctrinally, they're same as Roman Catholics. They're sacramentalists. Ex opere operato rituals, the rest of it. But in terms of theocratic politics, they're Protestant. Not in theology, but in organization. Beth Moore, claiming to be a woman pastor, joined this particular denomination. They're called High Church Episcopalians in the United States. And she goes to one in Texas. Well, this past week, they had a Muslim imam preaching in that church from the Quran. Preaching in that church from the Quran. While Christians are persecuted and even martyred from one Muslim country to the other, they have a Muslim preaching at a church in Texas. Beth Moore is a disgusting, reprehensible woman. She's a false believer. She's not a sister in Christ. If she ever was, she's backslidden. She's a mystic, and she's a heretic. Yet, she has a faithful following. They will follow her, but they will not follow the real Jesus. What would happen to a woman like her in a Muslim country, claiming to be a religious leader, What would happen to her? Flogging, decapitation? This is just she's an extremely stupid woman. I believe that she is demonically inspired, but so are the people who are paying attention to a woman like that, including John Piper, who shared a platform with her, with these visualization exercises of the Lectio Divina. They resemble the exercises of Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. It's based on mysticism. Nonetheless, that is the situation we have. Where are the godly women? But women like her would not get into the positions they're in if we had more godly men saying it's wrong. But we do not. This week on Word for the Weekend, I addressed the death of Sarah Young, the authoress of the book Jesus Calling, a book that has sold more than 40 million copies and over 10 million on the internet, but it's being remarketed by the publishers who are cashing in on her death. The woman engaged in automatic writing. She obtained a technique from two people who wrote a book called God Calling, and they were both occult practitioners. Now, automatic writing is essentially, it's very much the same as the Ouija board. Very much the same. I deal with it on RTN's teaching, which will be on Moriel this week, on Word for the Weekend. These things happen so often, and it becomes so commonplace. Despite their depravity, people just shrug it off and ignore it. This is the state of the church. Well, this is one of the reasons God allows persecution. Christians become blasé. They shrug it off. They get used to it, to the point where persecution becomes a necessary evil. Just think of Lot at Sodom and Gomorrah. He became accustomed to the perversion. He lived in that environment, that he just accepted it for what it was, even though it was not him. He was called a righteous man, but he actually called the practitioners of these things in Sodom and Gomorrah his brothers. And he tried to placate them and get along with them. My brethren, don't do this. Take my daughters. Knowing, of course, they wouldn't. They only liked boys. But they were going to sexually violate these two angelic beings that appeared in human form. Lot found out that if you try to accommodate evil, that if you try to live in peace with it, it's going to try to get into your doors. And you won't be able to. Again, God allows the opposition and persecution. Oh, it comes from the devil. But it will shock Christians, at least the ones who will not out and out backslide and sell out, which many will, and some have done already, to realize what's really happening. It got to the point where Lot had no hope other than rescue. And of course, we know in the days in which we live, we will reach a point where we will have no hope other than rescue. And there will be that rescue. And that rescue, of course, will be the rapture for those of us who remain. These are the realities of the times in which we live. This is the state of the church. The attacks on Israel that have taken place this week in the media, particularly MSNBC, two Muslim political commentators telling half-truth after half-truth after half-truth, trying to convince the viewership of MSNBC that Israel's fight for survival in the face of radical Islam is the world's #1 problem, and the Israelis are unjust. Oh, Lord. We had a radical Muslim preacher just get defunded in Birmingham, England, only because of protests that came from human rights organizations. They wanted to give him 2.2 million of the taxpayers' money, but were blocked. A Muslim preacher demanding the firing of a Christian academic for simply discussing the Charlie Hebdo murders in Paris. The Muslims murdered this guy, and because you discuss it, you're an Islamophobe. You're guilty of a hate crime. How dare you discuss the fact that Muslims murdered these people? This is what these people want. And the political left will give it to them. But it's not about Islam, and it's not about the political left. It's about silencing Christians. It's about stopping the gospel. It's about persecuting the faithful church. Again, I'm not somebody who takes delight in these things. I don't like speaking about these things continually, but it's no longer ignorable. I've spent enough time in countries where Christians are persecuted, communist and Islamic. I spent enough time there, and I know what it's like for those believers firsthand. I've seen it. They've told me, their pastors have told me, etc. People who've been in prison and all sorts. I know what it's like for them. But now I see the Western world going on the same path. And instead of having a church that is up in arms, we have a church that is compromising with these things. The Tony Campolas of this world. We have a church that is ignoring it and teaching false doctrine instead. The Andy Stanleys, the Stephen Furticks, the Joel Osteens, the Take Your Picks, certainly the Bill Johnsons. The mainstream leadership of what had been evangelicism in the Western world is now gone. I've said this before. I saw it go in Britain after Martin Lloyd-Jones and G. Campbell Morgan. David Pawson was the last one, and he's now with the Lord. I told him, I used to tell him, as you've heard me say, he was the last of the Mohegans, of the tradition of British Bible expositors going back to Spurgeon. He was the last one, going back to Charles Spurgeon. Christian scholars, great Christian scholars, maybe Howard Marshall, but Donald Guthrie, but really F.F. Bruce was the last great one. Great Christian authors, there were people who tried to tell the truth like Stephen Gardner, but the last great Christian author was C.S. Lewis when he wrote the Screwtape Letters and things of this nature. No, it began in Britain, but then America, Canada, Australia began going the same way. Well, it's begun in Britain once again. It is going to become increasingly tough for Christians in the professions in the United States. They want to dismantle the Constitution. A nation has turned its back on the God that gave freedom. And they say that freedom comes from politicians, from corrupt government, not from the Almighty, directly contrary to the Constitution and to the Declaration of Independence. Now, understand why they're ignoring what the Constitution and Declaration of Independence states. They are endowed by their Creator. It is self-evident. They're endowed by their Creator with these rights. The reason they want to get rid of these documents is because they want to get rid of the document that they are predicated upon, which is, of course, the Word of God. Even a deist like Thomas Jefferson understood the importance of the Judeo-Christian scriptures for democracy to work. And he was not a Christian in any biblical sense. He was a deist. We've got a problem, friends. And I'm not talking about the problems taking place in the mainstream media, like MSNBC, or the problems taking place in our corrupt judiciary and corrupt judicial system. I'm not even talking about the problems taking place in our godless academic institutions anymore, nor the problems happening in the professions. We're talking about the problems that are happening among Christians. Once more, as we continually lament within the so-called church. It doesn't really bore me, but it certainly grieves me. Week after week after week on Catching Up with Jacob, as we recount the week's events and examine them from a biblical perspective, how things just continually deteriorate. And deteriorate they will. Just like in the days of Lot. Just like in the days of Noah. Jesus told us that. The New Testament tells us that. It'll be like the days of Lot and like the days of Noah. Judgment came and destruction came. But before that, a rescue came. Meanwhile, let the faithful believers bind together in prayer. Let us construct a model of church that's not based on denominational politics, but based on the principles of Scripture. We need to become a community in and of ourselves. Our own schools, our own medical practices, our own professional practices, our own commerce. Oh, we'll let the outside come in on our terms. The world will, of course, try to legislate and control. They want to get control of homeschooling. They want to dictate curriculums. They want to force Christian schools to teach transgenderism to little kids. They want to do that, and they're going to try. We have to strengthen the things that remain and preach the gospel while there is still time to do so. We thank God for the people who know this. We thank God that Jesus warned us these things would happen ahead of time, and he told us what to do about it. Admittedly, the speed at which these things have overtaken the Western world and the Western world's church have left us all rather flabbergasted. The speed at which they've transpired. But not the things themselves. Not by a long shot. Again, as we've said many times, read what Tozer warned was going to happen years ago. Read what Francis Schaeffer warned was going to happen years ago. Read what the downgrade controversy in England, what Charles Spurgeon said would happen long ago. It's happening. The world doesn't know what it means, but either does the worldly church. We, however, are supposed to know what it means. And we are supposed to know how to react to it. And so it is. It was also announced this week at the Weizmann Institute, which is in Israel, that for the first time, something approximating parthenogenesis has happened with human beings. The construction of a living model of a 14-day-old human embryo without the use of sperm or ovum. They did it with stem cells. And they saw the stem cells mutate under controlled conditions into 4 other kinds of cells, including trophoblasts, which form the placenta surrounding the embryonic cell, or the cell that models an embryo. But it models the embryo so well that it has a yolk where primordial liver and renal, that is kidney tissue, begins to form. And these lagunae, where maternal blood brings nourishment to an embryo. But understand this, it is secreting hormones that will show a pregnancy test positive. This artificially constructed model of an embryo is secreting hormones that will cause a pregnancy test to read positive. And this is human. Now, of course, this is being pursued in the name of scientific research to understand early stage congenital birth defects. A noble goal, a noble goal. I have no problem with the goal, and I have no problem with the technology. But we know that the goals that are initially intended are not going to be confined to that only. Others will have other goals. They'll attempt parthenogenesis. Now, parthenogenesis takes place in the last species of dinosaurs, as some people would describe them. I'm talking of the Komodo dragon, among others. They actually reproduce without gametes. What will happen if these models can develop embryonically in time in an artificial placenta or even in a host placenta, and we construct a human being? Well, will you have a scenario where the incarnation of Christ can be counterfeited? I believe personally the Antichrist will be born of a woman and then demon possessed. But we're seeing things happening. What if we procreate people who are not people? Where will their souls come from? People speak of the Nephilim and things of this nature, but that is macrocosmic. What if it's something happening in the microcosmic world of genetic biology? This has been a major breakthrough. Watch this space. Okay. I'm in the United States for the next few weeks. We'll be having meetings, New York, Baltimore, in Devore, California, near San Bernardino, near Los Angeles, in Ohio, and in Wisconsin, and certain other things. The schedule is on the Morio website. Please avail yourself of it. For our friends in Britain, the Morio conference on the 17th to 19th of November is booking out quickly. We're asking for more rooms. If you go to the Morio website, moriel.org, and contact Beryl Hunter, you'll be doing yourself a great service if you wish to attend the conference with Pastor Tim Leach and myself. We're filling up very quickly. There's not much left. I hope they give us more rooms because we hate to turn people away. If you can join us in Britain, we'd love it. And of course, I shall be coming to Ireland, to both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Those dates will be published soon. The venues at Orangefield Crescent and at Calvary Pentecostal Church in Newton Abbey and Orangefield Crescent in Belfast. Pastor Stephen Trimble and Pastor Marty Foster. We shall be there the second, third, fourth, and fifth of November. On the 6th of November, I shall be speaking in the Republic of Ireland in County Boyle. Again, those details will be posted on the Morio website. In the meantime, I'm going to leave you in the good hands of James, of Marco, of Davy, of David, and above all of the Lord. Thank you so much for joining us, and please keep us in prayer. Also, one final thing. We're going to be featuring or highlighting every week, spotlighting one of the things Moriel is doing. This week, we wish to spotlight what we're doing in India. The orphanage that was delayed in opening due to COVID from restrictions we received from the Indian government is open and blossoming. The children are doing well. Pastor Samuel and his wife and his team are doing an excellent job. Excellent. It is blossoming beautifully. And the church in Punjab is nearly finished. We were building one. But the Punjab is an area where there's a lot of persecution, a lot. It's not an easy place to be a believer. I shall be joining Pastor Mark Jackson there in late November. Your prayers for our work in India are much appreciated, as is your support. Hindus and Sikhs are coming to a saving knowledge of the truth. God bless, and thank you so very, very much.